Okay, hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is Aubrie Cyphers. My presentation is on language development and how culture can impact. This class is Child and Adolescent Development at George Fox University, and let's get into it. So, the main points I will discuss. First, I will talk about what is language, and then the different theories that go with language development, the developmental stages during childhood, and the variations of language development depending on culture, multilingualism, and then I will conclude with a fact or myth game. So you may be asking yourself, why, why language? Why is language important? Well, everyone has language, everyone has communication skills. But what is language? Language is a communication system that uses methods such as speech, writing, or gestures to communicate our ideas, our thoughts, our expressions. And it's influenced by nature and nurture. So when I say nature, we've got this biological disposition in our brains. Language processing occurs in the left hemisphere of the brain, which includes reading, oral speaking, those thinking, those language tasks. And the nurture, the environment piece, well, vocabulary depends on how much vocabulary you're exposed to. Which language do you speak? English, Spanish, Portuguese? Um, Language is our ability to perceive, produce, and use words. And it makes us human because there is no other species that expresses sentences with speech. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the different psychology theories, there are three kind of approaches. There's the learning approach, which is behaviorism, brought from us by Skinner, that language is learned through mimicking speech and then receiving reinforcement. For example, baby says cookie, mom says, oh, you want a cookie, gives cookie. And this does not explain how spontaneous words or sentences are formed, though. That's where we get into like the native approach. Noam Chomsky was the psychologist behind this, and he explains that language is innate ability. We all have this biological predisposition for language. Our mouth structures and our brain, like we all have the ability to produce language. And then the interactionist approach is the communication of the language occurring in the environment. So more of that nurture. So here are two childhood developmental stages. So infants, toddlers, the milestones will look like a newborn crying. At 2 months, they start cooing, making vowel sounds like ooh, ah. This is also when turn taking takes place, where it's like you're having a conversation with your baby. And then 6 months, we've got babbling consonant vowel sounds. So this can sound like ba 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 ba, na 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 na. And then 12 months, around 12 months, a child will typically say their first word, which is usually a noun. And then you move into early childhood. And this is when they start getting that phonological awareness of how we form words. We start saying, let's sound out the word. We use phonemes like k, at, to produce the word cat, or we use morphemes with suffixes and prefixes. So grammar rules are being taught during this time, and this is when we start reading and writing and building our literacy skills. Next is middle childhood. This is where vocabulary increases dramatically because a lot of reading skills are taught and practiced, and then they also get language processing skills. Something that happens during this age is called metalinguistic awareness. This is the ability to think and analyze language, how different words, they can sound the same, but they can have different meanings. For example, the animal duck versus, oh, duck, I'm gonna throw a ball, the verb. Um, this time it's fun because jokes and puns and play on words can happen. But also, kids become more aware of like grammar errors. For example, past tense, we typically will add ed on the end of the verb, but the past tense of run is ran. And then complex grammar is being taught and learned. So active voice, like active voice is like the baker is baking. The passive voice would be the cake is being baked by the baker. And then conditional sentences that they're like they use the word if. So if I could, I would do so and so. All right, next slide. Oh, we're still talking about middle childhood. Pragmatics is how we use language in different social contexts. So during this age, we begin we become aware that language could be used for different functions. You know, like for requesting things. The written language looks different. You know, uh, you're not going to use the same words that you use in a text message that you would in like a school writing assignment. And then you can change your speech depending on who or where you're talking to. So, for example, I don't talk to my best friend the same way I talk to my grandpa or my teacher. And then, um, and then there's this conversational rules like eye contact, body language, taking turns when speaking, and another thing that happens is called code switching, and that's the ability to alternate between variations of language. So this could be using slang and casual language with a peer, but maybe more formal language when talking to a teacher and adult. Another cool thing, um, I will give an example. Eu vou falar português com meus amigos brasileiros, but I will speak English with you guys. That is called multilingual code switching, which happens when you know more than one language. So you know who knows the language and you can switch. You can also mix the words, which you see a lot with kids who are both bilingual or multilingual trying to learn their languages. Okay, how language development depends on culture. So these are our variations. Social interaction. This is who talks with children. And do we use language to connect with people or do we use it to entertain? Do we talk one-on-one or in group settings? The next factor that can affect language development is value of speech. So how much vocabulary is being spoken around someone? You know, everyone has varying vocabulary usage around them. Some have, you know, some more fancy words and others just have the basic. And then there's interaction status. So think about like in cultures, who initiates language? Sometimes it can be seen as rude for a child to initiate conversation with an adult, depending on the culture. Um, Another variation is seeing language as intentional. So in America and a lot of Western cultures, when infants start cooing and babbling and then they kind of pause and then we talk to them, we see this as intentional. We think of it as, oh, this baby's having a conversation with me. Lastly, um, how language is taught can affect the development of language as well. So some cultures, they prefer observation, or maybe they prefer more socialization in the environment, or teaching the academic part of language first before we really start speaking in sentences and expressing our ideas. And next, okay, I'm going to talk about multilingualism. Fact, only about 26% of children in the United States can speak more than one language. And of those 26%, most of them are speaking Spanish and English. But in other countries, you see that children speak more than one language. You see this in Asia and in Europe. And I mean, Canada has 55%. And it's funny because these kids in other countries, they are learning their second language, like during their elementary years. Where here in America, you don't learn your second language until maybe middle or high school, which is past this like developmental age. The older you get, the harder it is to learn a second language. This is very interesting to me. Uh, Multilingualism in classrooms. So this is my real world example. Developmental bilingual programs are being increasingly used instead of just fully immersing a child. Let's say a child immigrated here and they don't have English skills. If we immerse them completely in English, they may risk losing their first language, which we don't want. So this this developmental bilingual classes, you're starting to see more of them in America. So you may ask, how does it work? Well, it's best to start in the primary language. So for example, Spanish, and then gradually add in English. And then this has been proven to be more successful with learning English. And this can be hard to find teachers to work in these programs because they need to be fluent and highly skilled in both the languages. Okay, so the impact of being multilingual. Luckily, there are more advantages than disadvantages. So we've got better cognitive control because we need to be able to inhibit the language Spanish when we're speaking to our English speaking friends on the playground. We got better memory skills, better executive functioning, like planning. Kids who are multilingual, they can understand grammar rules better because they need to know the grammar rules for each language, better metalinguistic skills, and they're able to participate and have more friends from diverse communities. And the disadvantages is that they have smaller vocabularies when they're developing their language skills. And it can be difficult to maintain one language if another one's being used more. So this is where you can risk losing your first language. All right, let's play a game, fact or myth. Um, it is easier for a child to learn multiple languages from birth and becomes harder to learn a second language if not learned at the same time as their first. Yep, that's a fact. If a child learns and maintains a second language before they are 10 years old, they cannot be distinguished from a native speaker. This is also a fact. The younger you are, the better. A child under the age of 5 can lose their first language if they're completely immersed. Yep, that's a fact. Infants from different cultures, they develop the same milestones as kids from other ages speaking different languages. Yes, that's also a fact. Becomes more difficult to learn a second language. Yep, fact. Children achieve the same language milestones. Learning 2 or more languages. Yep, fact. Okay, last one. Children growing up in poverty will hear 30 million less words by the time they're 3 years old. Myth. Betty Hart did a study observing 42 families from socioeconomic classes, and she found that 30 million words were spoken. Okay, 30 million less words were spoken by kids growing up in poverty by the time they're 3. This is not true. A company called Lena produced these recording devices that they could put on babies, and they found that It was actually 4 million less words, so 30 million is an exaggeration. 4 million less words by the time the child turns 4, depending on if they were in lower income classes compared to higher income classes. Okay, thank you guys so much. I am sorry if the presentation went over. I will see you guys all in class. Oh, and here are my references.